You're in the water loop.
Water loop. Welcome to Water Loop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. Milwaukee faces a significant challenge with over 70,000 lead service lines. In response, the city has implemented a replacement program that leverages federal funding to focus on disadvantaged communities. In this episode, Superintendent Pauly of Milwaukee Water Works, Janet Pritchard from the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, and Richard Diaz of the Blue-Green Alliance discuss the program's funding strategies, including the impact of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the robust workforce development strategy. Before starting the episode, I want to mention that Waterloop is a nonprofit news outlet and coverage depends on supporters. This episode is made possible by Blue Conduit, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. This episode is sponsored by Blue Conduit, the leading water analytics and technology company pioneering the use of predictive modeling for water system decision-making and planning. Blue Conduit utilizes advanced AI and machine learning algorithms paired with an expert team and rigorous process to empower local leaders to make decisions about their water systems, including lead service line inventories and lead line replacement. Visit blueconduit.com. My first stop was at the Milwaukee Water Works to speak with Superintendent Pauly about the history of lead service lines in the city and how they are replacing them and paying for this work. Thank you for having me here in Milwaukee. Could you talk to me about the history of lead service lines here?
Certainly. So Milwaukee, the utility began in 1872. We started installing lead services immediately in 1872, primarily because there was no other material that was suitable for our climate and the stress of a pressurized water system. And those services continued to be installed until the last one was installed in 1952, but primarily they were installed between 1872 and the early 40s, and there were a very few installed after the early 40s. They weren't prohibited, lead wasn't prohibited until 1962. So through those 80 plus years, over 70,000 lead service lines were installed in the city limits of Milwaukee.
You do have some pretty good records showing where they're located, which is an advantage to a community as they're trying to tackle this.
Yes, our record keeping was all the credit in the world to those that came before. Our record keeping was very good. We have microfiche of the permit records that go back to permit record number 1. We were able to review those permit records to determine the public side material for the service lines, and that's why we feel very confident that we know where the lead is and where we need to go to remove it.
When and how did the push start here in Milwaukee to replace these lines?
So the push started after the crisis in Flint, and certainly that became a priority for utilities all over the country. But the start of the lead service line replacement program in Milwaukee was created by an ordinance that the Common Council and the mayor put in, which went into effect in January of 2017. So that ordinance required full service line replacement under certain conditions, one of which was a leak or failure on the service line pipe anywhere between the water main and the meter, which is located in the basement of most homes. If the water service provided water to a licensed or registered childcare, the service line was to be replaced in full. And then if the service line would be replaced as part of a planned project. And initially that meant if the water main was going to be replaced, then all of the service lines from water main to meter would be replaced. And the ordinance required replacement. So once entered into the program, there was no opt-out option. The utility paid for the public side of the service replacement because the ownership in our city, the ownership delineation is at the property line where the curb stop typically lies. The city assumed 2/3 of the cost of the private side replacement, and the property owner was responsible for the other 1/3 of the private side replacement, which was about $1,600 initially. It rose to approximately $1,850. It was adjusted on an annual basis and slowly started to come down. Thanks to the bill funding, we were able to eliminate the cost share for residential properties as of January of this year. We knew if we wanted to expand, we needed to prioritize how we did that expansion. So well over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago, and this was partially based on the bill funding's strong recommendation and the DNR's strong recommendation that these federal dollars be focused in the neighborhoods with the most need. So we developed a prioritization plan, and it's a scoring matrix. There's 3 components. It's the Area Deprivation Index, which is an index created by the UW-Madison School of Public Health, using, I believe, 14 different socioeconomic indicators to create a single-digit score for a census block group. And so we used that. We used the incidence of elevated blood lead levels in children under the age of 6 within a census block group, and then we used the density of lead service lines within a census block group. We created a score for every census block group in the city, and we are this year, for the first time with that program, focusing on the 10 neighborhoods that had the highest score, meaning the most disadvantaged areas of most need. Next year, we are currently rescoring every census block group using current data. We will likely focus on 15 to 20 new census block groups next year, and this will continue for the length of the program, which will exceed 10 years certainly.
I wanted to ask about the funding piece overall. So, and that's a great piece of it. How have you gone about paying for all of this work, all this lead service line replacement?
So we've been incredibly fortunate that the DNR, and we speak regularly with the DNR certainly recognized the challenge that Milwaukee faced with the number of lead services. And as far back as 2017, they had the foresight to make some principal forgiveness funding available to, and it's a statewide program, but available to utilities throughout the state. And Milwaukee was fortunate enough to receive principal forgiveness funding to help assist with paying for the private side replacement in a number of years, 2017, 18, 2020 through 2022, and now with the influx of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding, there is even a greater amount of funding available for the city. And unfortunately, Milwaukee does meet the definition of a disadvantaged community per the Wisconsin DNR requirements, which makes us eligible for a approximately 50% split of principal forgiveness versus low interest loan. And so we have been able to offset some of the cost to the private side with that Safe Drinking Water Loan grant funding. The utility has absorbed the public side costs, which starting in 2017 through 2023, we were replacing about 1,000 per year. In 2024, our goal is 2,200. In 2025, our goal is 3,500. We will continue to make application for the Safe Drinking Water Loan Program funding. The utility will absorb low interest loans through that program, and then hopefully we'll continue to receive principal forgiveness to pay for the private side of the replacement. But certainly the funding is going to be a challenging conversation when the bill funding is exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a great influx of funding for communities across the country, but it's this short window of time, 5 years, and what's going to happen at the end of that. Hopefully the $15 billion for lead has been spent wisely. Maybe Congress will decide to keep investing, but you haven't crossed that bridge yet, right? Or have you thought about what will happen then?
We are thinking about it, and we engaged an owner's rep last year to assist us with our expansion of the program, and one of their other responsibilities is to prepare a long-term plan for replacement of all of the lead services, and one of the components of that is the funding side of things. And certainly you're right, the bill funding is a 5-year program. We have heard, and we're optimistic that it will perhaps extend a few more years longer than 5, and that perhaps some of the funding that was allocated out throughout the country won't be used because some of the states that received funding may not have a lot of lead service lines. And so that we're hopeful that if Wisconsin can show they can spend the funding that was allocated, if there's additional available, it'll be reallocated here and we can make this program last a little longer than 5 years. But certainly the end of the program is something we're talking about, and we're hopeful the federal government will add additional funding for this certainly necessary improvement, because otherwise there will be an impact to not only our ratepayers but potentially the city tax rate base because of the city's commitment to replacing or paying for a replacement of the private side.
Next, I spoke with Janet Pritchard of the Environmental Policy Innovation Center to get her perspective on the financing approach by Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin and how it connects with federal funding and approaches around the country. Could you tell that story, maybe how Milwaukee was doing this, a few years ago, maybe pre-bill, and then what they've done to work with the different resources that are out there and ramp this up, if you will?
Yeah. So prior to the lead funding that's been made available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Milwaukee, as I mentioned, was removing about 1,000 pipes per year. They were using the WIFTA funds made available through the Booker Act, and that was covering their costs for removing the private side of the lead pipe. But because the funds were limited there, they also charged about 1/3 of the private side costs to the property owner. And then the public side of the pipe, they would replace that using ratepayer funds like they would for any of their infrastructure pipe replacement in their system. But with the new funds coming through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Milwaukee is now able to not only expand its program, but to replace the private side of the pipe without any cost to the property owner. And the bill funds for Milwaukee are even able to pay for some of the public side as principal forgiveness, which functions as a grant, a portion of the loan coming from the state revolving funds that don't have to be repaid. And so that's a tremendous opportunity for Milwaukee, because it means if we can take full advantage of that funding, we can really go far towards removing a substantial portion or potentially even the majority or all of our 60,000 pipes with those funds. Some other steps that Milwaukee took to really position itself well for those funds is together with a group in Milwaukee called the Coalition on Lead Emergency, which is a coalition comprised of community groups, churches, hospitals, medical professionals, nonprofits. When this bipartisan infrastructure funding was approved by Congress, we knew that this was going to greatly enhance funds for lead service line replacement that would come through, in Wisconsin, the agency is the Department of Natural Resources that administer our state revolving funds. And so immediately we engaged in advocacy to make sure that the policies that determined how that funding was going to come through the state and how it was going to be prioritized would favor communities like Milwaukee that have not only an enormous number of lead pipes, in fact we have probably over 1/3 or maybe even around 40% of the pipes in the state are in the city of Milwaukee. And also some of the highest areas of deprivation and socioeconomic strain are in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that these funds would be able to target these communities. So the Coalition on Lead Emergency worked with the Department of Natural Resources at the state level to help shape the policies that were going to determine where these funds would go. And we're lucky we also have a really strong team at the state level that was willing to take on these issues and work with us. And Milwaukee Water Works as well as an agency did its own advocacy to the state, echoing a lot of the same policy recommendations that were being made by COLE. And I think that these actions also influenced and assisted the state in developing its policies. So now, under the policies that were adopted, Milwaukee's very well positioned to get 100% of principal forgiveness for the private side and even some principal forgiveness for the public side as well.
How does this funding approach in Wisconsin and Milwaukee compare to other states? Is this really a unique approach, a beneficial approach compared to what other states are doing? Is it something other states should be looking to copy?
Yes, well, there is a wide variety across states in terms of the policies that they're adopting for the distribution of these funds. In some states, for example, the funds are only reserved for small communities, and cities like Chicago, for example, could have a challenge getting the funds from their state. In some states, any recipient of these funds can only get around 50% of their total grant as principal forgiveness, whereas in Wisconsin, the neediest communities can get up to 100% of their grant for replacing the private side. So I think there are, and also in the project prioritization policies for even which lead pipe replacement projects are elevated to the top of the list in Wisconsin. Wisconsin considers a number of sort of health and vulnerability factors and other kind of unique considerations that I think lift up Wisconsin as a best practice in this space. So it's not to say that other states aren't doing some good things as well, but I think the policies that Wisconsin has adopted is a best practice. And in my work, working on these funding issues across states, I often refer to Wisconsin as a best practice example.
Yeah. What can Wisconsin and Milwaukee do to further leverage and capitalize on, the funding situation right now, and also consider that Bill has a time window, and how can you kind of build on all of that?
Yeah, well, as I've said, Milwaukee has positioned itself very well to take advantage of these funds. Now they have to do just that. They have to take advantage of it. At the moment, I think Milwaukee's ambition in terms of the scale at which it wants to ramp up its replacement of funds is maybe not as ambitious as it should be. Right now, they're on a trajectory to increase the number of pipes they replace each year by about an extra 1,000 each year. But the thing is, the bill funds are only available during a limited window. And we expect, in fact, that the funds will be available definitely through 2029 and possibly through 2030. And so that's 5 more years that Milwaukee has to take advantage of these funds, and we need to ramp up our ambition more steeply. As I mentioned, we have 60,000 pipes, so increasing how many we remove from 3,000 this year to 4,000 next year and 5,000 the next year. Well, we won't even get halfway if we creep ahead at that level. So we need to really take advantage of this money while it's here. If Milwaukee asks for more money from the state, it will get more money.
That's what I was going to ask, is how from a financial perspective they could take advantage of the funding and how to accelerate even further. So it's really asking. And
they simply need to apply for larger grants, larger state revolving fund awards from the state. And under the policies that the city and Cole advocated for, Milwaukee would get more money if they ask for it. And another thing that I hadn't mentioned is that the mayor of Milwaukee has affirmed and endorsed the federal 10-year time frame for replacing pipes in Milwaukee. It's 10-year time frame. Really, the way that would play out would be a 2037 deadline. And I'm very proud of Milwaukee that the mayor has done that, because many other large cities that are facing the tens of thousands of pipes like Milwaukee have been more hesitant around publicly endorsing that ambition.
Development of the local workforce is a key area of emphasis for Milwaukee's lead service line replacement, as explained by Patrick Pauly. When it comes to getting the work done on the ground, what's the approach? How do you create the workforce or tap into the workforce for getting this done?
So the city has 3 existing programs related to workforce development. The every contract that we issue has a 25% SBE, which is small business enterprise requirement. So 25% of all dollars have to go to a firm registered as a small business enterprise with the city. It has a 40% resident preference program, meaning 40% of the hours have to be performed by workers certified in the city's residence preference program. And there's also an apprenticeship requirement that we expanded, that has been in place for some time on all of the waterworks contracts, but we expanded for the lead service line project specifically. So we require an apprentice from the laboring community, an apprentice from operator, and an apprentice from plumbing. And Milwaukee was named a workforce hub by the Biden administration a couple of months ago. So there's been quite a bit of focus on improvements to particularly the apprenticeship program. So we are working towards some more specific utilization goals related to the apprenticeship to help create a pipeline, create a workforce. So there's been a lot of focus on workforce development with the lead service line, and there will continue to be.
Not only helping to get the work done, but helping to create jobs and economic growth for people and parts of the city, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we've been fortunate with the contractor pool. I think there was a lot of concern that the contractor pool would not be large enough for an expanded program, especially when we've got Chicago 90 miles to the south of us. Their program is going to be
Massive.
Massive is the right word, significantly larger than ours. And so, and certainly Milwaukee has well over 60,000 lead service lines remaining. There are some suburban communities that surround the city that also, sprung up in the same time period that the city of Milwaukee did. And so within the state of Wisconsin, the numbers vary broadly, but could be over 200,000 total lead service lines. So the question about contractor capacity is one that has been asked for a number of years. We saw more contractors submitting bids on our most recent advertisements than we had previously. So that we feel is a very good sign for us.
I also spoke with Richard Diaz of the Blue-Green Alliance about the benefits for the local workforce in Milwaukee, as well as the way that outreach to the community is being conducted.
We are beginning to ramp up the amount of lines replaced each year, and that ramp up will require a larger workforce. And what we see is the utility in accordance with our city's MORE ordinance and our resident preference program, mandating that each contractor that is awarded a bid has to hire 40% of their workforce or have 40% of the work hours performed by people from certain disadvantaged zip codes. That ordinance is on the books for any public construction jobs over a certain dollar amount, and lead service line replacement falls into that category. And with this equity program, there is a clause in which contractors have to have an apprentice for each skilled craft. So that's laborers, plumbers, and operating engineers. And the laborers have been incredibly well at hiring diverse candidates and getting diverse apprentices. In fact, most of their apprentices are women and people of color. And now we see the plumbers and the operators having the opportunity through lead service line replacement to diversify their talent pool. We think this is great. And as the city continues to ramp up and request more money from the state to replace more lead lines with construction, we'll see greater diversity in those other skilled trades, plumbers and operators. So incredible work is being done at different levels. We see the collaboration of community-based organizations and labor unions working with the utility and the mayor's office. We see the city working with the state better. It's just a complete success for our city. Now we just need to make sure that we are requesting more money from the state so that we can replace lines and create more jobs. The groups that have advocated for the state to have a better and fair distribution process are now the same groups that are trying to work with the utility to conduct that outreach as a part of the Safe Drinking Water Loans programs guidance from the federal EPA, and how 40% of those dollars should be grants, 51% of those dollars should be loans. You also can use a portion of that 51% for set-asides or capacity building dollars. And those groups that have advocated to the state that money should be distributed fairly have also advocated to the state, like, hey, let's crank out some money for outreach. So the state is now allowing for utilities to partner with community-based organizations to conduct that outreach, right? Nobody wants a door knock from a utility because they think you just owe them money, or they're coming to shut something off. So much better for you to get a door knock from a community-based organization that you see year-round doing programming for different services that a community may need. So we see neighborhood associations being able to partner with utilities and go after resources to give those neighborhood-based organizations money to do that outreach. It costs, people's time costs, and I think the utility knows that. So, not only do we see community-based organizations doing advocacy, we see them partnering with utilities to do the work and replacing these lead lines.
I wanted to get the perspective of someone who is out in the community. So I spoke with Amanda Clark of the Dominican Center, who is active in outreach and education of residents.
Well, we have a lot of homes that are built when they use a lot of lead paint, a lot of lead piping, a lot of lead products. And so now we're seeing the problems with the young people with their behavioral issues, learning disabilities, things of that nature. And we're in a phase of trying to correct it now and educate the residents.
How much awareness do you think there is among the people here about the lead issue? Like, are people pretty informed now because it's been a kind of big deal, or is it still education happening?
More education and more outreach needs to be happening. A lot of people don't follow the city of Milwaukee, like Facebook pages or social media pages or their website. They don't have the app. They're not signed up for the alerts. And that's where they do a lot of the messaging. Then they lean on smaller organizations like Dominican Center to do that outreach. But as I stated, it's 3 organizers at my job, and we have to cover the span of 130 blocks. So how can we be tasked with that heavy lift to educate? We need everybody. I don't think that it should just be a social media post and then you go on about your day. We got to come out here and knock doors and meet people where they are and educate them.
How do you do that for that 130 blocks? Like, that's really the best thing, is like going around and just talking to people?
Yep, walking to the store. You catch the people standing outside the store, start that conversation, have the conversation. Hey, can I talk to you for a couple seconds? You know about the lead lateral programs? Do you know how lead affects your children, how it affects you, how it affects the food that you eat? Even with just using your faucet water, washing off your fruits or whatever you're doing, that's lead water that we're intaking.
What do you tell them then that they should do? Let's say you have that conversation with some people outside, out on the street. Okay.
Get your kid tested. Make sure you continue to get them tested for their lead levels to make sure that you're monitoring and keeping up with it. If it is identified that the property you live in, if you're renting, talk to your landlord and see what remedies they can do to get that resolved. Connect that property owner, if it is a landlord or a homeowner occupied property, connect them with the resources to help remedy the lead issues.
Tell me about COLE, that organization, and what their role is in kind of the outreach.
Their role is really education.
Okay.
They host cooking classes with families. They go out, they pass out the tablets where you could test your own water, like you drop it in the toilet, where you could test to see how much, or I think it's like a color-coded level where you can see how much lead is in your water. And when families see those types of things, it's like, you think about it. You put your kid in the car, you put them in the car seat. You keeping them safe that way. But if you at home and telling your kids to drink some water, you could be doing more damage.
Patrick Pauly emphasized that community outreach is important to the utility and that this customer focus is part of the lead service line replacement work.
What's been the approach to communication with your customers, with residents about this work, especially when you are targeting a certain neighborhood to go in and do the work? How do you let people know what's going on?
That's another lesson learned. So I guess starting with the neighborhood program, as I mentioned, we engaged an owner's rep who has CDM Smith, significant experience in other parts of the country with lead service line programs. They brought an outreach component that the utility did not have the capacity to do. So their outreach has consisted of quite a bit of, in addition to the transmittals that the utility had sent for their part of the program, transmittals directly to the residents, transmittals directly to the property owners, but also more person-to-person, community meetings, community outreach, outreach to the organizations that are known to the community, people going door to door and knocking, talking about the program. So they've put forth a full court press of customer outreach to try to get, and they have the advantage of working in a neighborhood where for the utility it was leaker failure on the north side of the city, leaker failure on the south side of the city, and you're bouncing from one, and so your outreach is focused on the one property that has to have the service replaced. So the neighborhood outreach has been, and this is our first year with this equity prioritization program, so the neighborhood outreach has been going on for 4 months already. Replacements just started in the neighborhoods 3 weeks ago. It's been a challenge. Even with zero cost share for the property owner, it has been challenging. And that's one of the things that from the outset of the program, there was a belief that this would be seen as such a benefit that people would be lining up for replacements. That is not what the utility experienced. Our initial outreach was great news. You are going to get a lead service line and it's only going to cost you $1,600 and you can repay that over 10 years as a special assessment, which works out to be very affordable. People did not immediately sign the paperwork and send that back to us. I mean, it took significant outreach, and to the point where our current consent rate in the utility part of the program is about 70% within the allotted time period. And then we have to pursue, which we don't like to do.
Follow up and keep going, yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
The equity prioritization program, the consent rate it's around 60% right now for this first year. So we are...
And that's even when it costs nothing to that
Correct.
resident. Wow.
Right.
People don't like disturbance, they don't like construction, they don't like change, all that. I guess that's a big part of it.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
What other lessons have you learned, advice you'd have for other communities, because this is a push across the United States right now, an estimated 9 million lead lines out there. What would you say to others trying to get going on this?
Well, so I've talked about the cost. I've talked about a lot of the lessons learned. One of the lessons learned that has come to me most recently is be prepared to have the same conversation over and over and over again, and sometimes with the same people. You and I are talking about this. I have talked about this hundreds of times over the last, and quite honestly, sometimes with the same people who work across the street in the political realm. And I understand why you have to have the conversation with. They've got a lot going on. There's a lot of complexity to this. I think so. Having the same conversation over and over with people is important to remember. Don't get bored with it. Always take the opportunity. Always be willing to have the conversation.
As communities across the country work to replace lead service lines, the lessons and approach of Milwaukee will certainly be valuable. How they have funded the work, emphasized local workforce development, and conducted community outreach.
You're in the water loop.